here, ready to do rule 7, 8, and 9 of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. So far we're halfway through the book. We'll get through the next half in the next two podcasts here. So starting off with rule 7, pursue what's meaningful, not what's expedient. Peterson returns to the Bible and the concept of sacrifice. Basically, sacrifice is delayed gratification, giving up something valued in the present for the sake of a better future. In Christ's temptations by Satan, Peterson sees Christ sacrificially refusing to take the easy way out of suffering, foregoing a path for humanity as a whole to reject evil. As he wrestled with doubts about life's meaning, Peterson concluded that suffering was the one thing he couldn't doubt, and that evil must have an opposite good, that is, whatever stops evil from happening. This formed the basis of Peterson's moral beliefs. If a person lives to pursue good, they'll find more and more meaning revealed over time. While this meaning isn't identical to happiness, it achieves balance between order and chaos and provides an antidote to suffering. So, seek to do what's meaningful, even if that means sacrificing what's expedient. So, Jeff, what do you think about that, and what did you think about this chapter?
Well, that was an awesome summary. I have 2 quotes from this chapter. I guess I can start with to kick things off. Actually, I'll do the first one, and then we can talk about it. I'll do the second one later.
Sure.
But the first quote was, "It's time to let go. Might even be time to sacrifice what you love best so that you can become who you might become, instead of staying who you are." So to me, the main takeaway, and there's a lot of different ways that you could interpret this, but
hold on, say that one more time. Say what it was again.
Did it cut out? Should I do the quote again?
No. Yeah, the quote. I just wanted to hear that again.
Oh, okay. The quote says, "It's time to let go. It might even be time to sacrifice what you love best so that you can become who you might become instead of staying who you are."
Yep.
I thought that was interesting. I think the main takeaway for this chapter was delaying gratification, not making decisions just based on your current needs, but having a longer outlook in your future, and trying to connect the dots when it comes to your how your decisions today will affect your life in the future. So there's under that quote, I added a few instances of real world scenarios that I thought this would apply to, but you can think about it in the importance of studying and applying yourself in school. A lot of people have the temptation to party and have fun in college and stuff like that, and that's cool, go for it. But when it's time to get to work, it's time to get to work. So there's there can be social pressures with that, where all your friends are going out and it's finals week, or you've got responsibilities that you should be attending to, and it's delaying that gratification and saying, look, if I don't go out tonight and I stay home and study, the odds of me doing well on this exam are a lot higher, and you're sacrificing a present opportunity, or you're sacrificing your wants in the present to have a better to set yourself up for a better future. Another away from school, I know I've talked a lot about that on the podcast, is just education. I think there's a lot of applications for this from this book that could be applied while you're in college. But another thing is also being present as a mother or father, son or daughter, and husband or wife. It's tempting to always work. It's tempting when your buddies ask you out to the bar for a beer, or to go to a concert or whatever. Realizing that there's a balance, right? Jordan Peterson, 1 foot in chaos, 1 foot in order. There's a balance. You should have time for your friends, and you should have time for your family. Sometimes you may be presented with an opportunity to have, where things start to be more about your friends and more about your work and less about your family life. And you don't know how that's going to set your future up. if you start to have tensions in your relationships and tensions at home and stuff like that because you're never around, that's something to be mindful of when those temptations come. And then the last one was being present in I guess I covered that, my bad. So yeah, being present in a relationship.
good.
The first one was like father, son or daughter, and then the last one was relationship, and then finding like a healthy work-life balance. So yeah, just be more mindful of like what you're doing today and how it will affect, your tomorrow.
You in the future. Yeah.
I don't know. What about you? What'd you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, well, just to like dive right into it, there's a couple like great analogies that I also like think he brings up, and one of the examples, and I'm not sure. Well, I've heard it once before, and maybe from this book. I could have sworn I've read it somewhere else. He kind of talks about the whole monkey in the jar type of thing, and I know you started off with that quote, essentially saying like sacrifice what you love most. Um, and sometimes you need to do that in order to change and grow and develop, right? um so Peterson uses the example of the monkey in the jar, which I thought was interesting. So I don't know exactly how the setup works, and I haven't never actually seen the experiment, but I assume it's a jar and the monkey's hand is able to fit inside the jar to pull out like food or like a snack. And the monkey as he can get his hand into the jar, but as soon as he grabs what he wants inside of it, he can't get his hand out. But he refuses to ungrip his hand, so now he's stuck with this jar and he can't get the jar off because he refuses to give up the snack, right? And sometimes, you know sometimes you need to let go of what you're really grasping onto, right? Because maybe it's hindering you from growing, maybe it's hindering you from developing, and you're afraid, or you think that's what you need, right? But sometimes you have to let go. So I thought that was like a great example. um and yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious, like when you look at people, um successful people and whatever they are, successful with their relationships, they're a successful father, they're a successful mother, they're a successful business person. um, Most of the time they have delayed gratification, right? They develop the skill of delayed gratification, where they don't just live for the, maybe they are very present, right? Because I think people that are mindful and practice meditation are pretty happy people, right? But I think those people too would appreciate the fact that you can't just live for today. You have to kind of delay some gratification. You don't want to just be giving into every single impulse that you have, right? Um, and that's where you get yourself into trouble, where you're like, you know what? One beer tasted good. Let me have another, and then a third, and then a fourth, and then before you know it, like maybe you're acting like a stupid drunk, and you could have been spending time with your girlfriend or spouse, or with your kids, so it's about like having balance and not just going for your immediate impulse. Peterson talks a lot about, like in the beginning too, about animals and how animals act within their nature, right? So it's like whatever it might be, I don't know, a snake. I heard this saying once, and maybe it was in a Thich Nhat Hanh book. We should maybe cover one of his books, because he's absolutely amazing. He was a Vietnamese monk nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Martin Luther King, and he's written a lot of really good books. And I think it was him that said something along the lines of, like, you know, there's a snake like going into the fire, or in a fire, and he pulls the snake out. The snake's still alive, so he pulls out the snake, and then the snake turns around and bites the guy in the hand. And then he drops the snake and then goes in and picks him out a second time to remove him. And somebody asked that person, why did you go and grab that snake? He just bit you. He's like, well, it's the snake's nature to bite me. I know better. It's in my nature to care for others and think about others and prevent harm. So I think that's what, like, one of the things he starts out with early is like, humans have this unique capacity to be able to think into the future. And with that, we've been able to create cities, we've been able to create technology, we're able to talk, even though we're like, whatever we are, 2,000 miles apart right now. So we've done all these great things because we've been able to think about the future, and able to delay some gratification, immediate gratification, because we know there's benefit in the future. So we can act. That's what sets us apart from all other animals. We can think differently and think ahead. So I just thought that was super interesting. I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
No, that's I think that's a huge part of just life in general, right? And I think that
Yeah.
could be applied to, the monkey in the jar analogy. I think reminded me a lot of people who are, don't eat the best and are kind of overweight, and then you pay for that later in life. I don't know, your body starts to shut down, and so yeah, like I guess that's a neither here nor there. It's not specific, but it's like one of those things where, like, you have the temptation to eat, whatever it is, like bad fast food, like fried chicken and stuff like that, because it tastes good, and you just like want that immediate pleasure. But like what you're doing to your body in the long run is pretty detrimental, if and there's also like there's that balance too. So it's like, it's not like you never can touch that. Like, you can treat yourself, but it just shouldn't be a part of your day-to-day life, like indulging in those types of things. And that practice and that concept is true for so many things in life. Just finding like healthy balance, and you want to live a fulfilled life. You only live once, and you want to enjoy yourself and have good experiences and go out with friends and all that. But you also want to have enough balance to it and enough control over it that you're giving yourself a good future.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And sometimes when you can think ahead like that, you can live a better life even today, if that makes sense. And I don't think people always think about it that way, right? It's like your decisions today are going to affect you later, and they affect you now, right? So it's like sometimes just giving into your immediate impulses and not like becoming a sharp, well-rounded person. Sometimes you could think something's enjoyable, but then as you start developing and you become more well-rounded, you realize like that's actually not that enjoyable, you know? I don't know. I like we talked about like drinking, right? Like just before the podcast started. And like
mm-hmm.
I used to really enjoy drinking, right, with friends and everything. And I still do, don't get me wrong. Like if we hung out and I came down to Florida or whatever, like I would definitely enjoy having a couple beers, going by the pool and have a good time. But it's not something that like I find like on a Saturday night or Friday night. It's like if I start drinking, I'm like not actually, yeah, one drink is fine, but if I like get a little drunk, I'm not really enjoying my time, with my wife. I'm not really enjoying my time with whoever I'm out with. I'm kind of a little out of it. Like I'm not mindful. Things are a little blurry. And I'm like, this actually isn't like a meaningful, like I want to spend my time present, and appreciating the other person.
Mm-hmm.
Life's short in that way. So it's like sometimes as you develop, you realize, hey, maybe this isn't good for me. And then I don't really drink too much. And then when I do drink, I feel like it's like toxic. Like I don't feel good.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting. Like if I just gave in to my immediate impulses constantly, maybe I would be, I don't know, an alcoholic, but I'm not, because I realize the detriment and the trajectory that could take me in. And it's not a place I want to live in my life. And it's not a good life to live,
Mm-hmm.
even though in the very short term, it might be enjoyable. Same thing goes for like cigarettes and any vice that can be abused, or taken too far.
Yeah.
So I just think that's like an interesting point.
That kind of brings me to the next quote that I had. It's a good segue. And that quote was, sometimes when things are not going well, it's not the world that's the cause. The cause is instead that which is currently not most valued, subjectively and personally. So I think this actually ties in a little bit
Mm-hmm.
to the last chapter 6, where set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. But people, if you're in that mindset where everything is about immediate gratification and going out with your friends and eating poorly, or whatever it is, then your future it can be affected negatively. If your grades aren't good in school, if you become overweight and your health isn't good, or like you just mentioned, becoming an alcoholic and drinking, and I don't know, that can affect your job, that can really affect relationships and friendships and things like that. Then there's like that moment where chapter 6 comes into play, and it's like, does that person who's an alcoholic start blaming? No, it's whoever. It's, if I was an alcoholic, it's Andrew. Andrew's the one. Every time we're together, it's blah. You start making excuses. You put it off on the other person, or so it's delaying the gratification, and then also I think taking ownership over things, which again kind of factors into the last chapter. And also one of the reasons I'm pretty excited to do the Jocko book, Extreme Ownership, because I think that's ties into all of this pretty nicely. But yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm definitely excited about that. Doing the extreme ownership. But yeah, it's a matter of taking responsibility, like you said, and you gotta step up, and you can't. I think that's the essence of a lot of this book, is just like putting your best foot forward, and taking responsibilities for things. And there's a couple more things we're going to cover, like being precise and not lying, which are the next two chapters we're essentially going to focus on. But yeah, it's just take responsibility for yourself, become sharp, learn, do essentially. I mean, I feel like in some ways, like, this book is the essence of what our podcast is trying to do. Like, we're putting our best foot forward. Like, doing a podcast is not something that's intuitive to the both of us, right? But we're learning, and we're gonna put our best foot forward and keep at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not make excuses, and learn what we can out of these books to become better, to become sharper, and to just live a life where we find some meaning. And I think that's what this chapter is also about.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, Peterson even gets into, and I do want to cover, because I also just think it's very interesting, like Socrates accepting his death in that story. But Peterson gets into the concepts that Nietzsche and Dostoevsky both kind of put out there in their philosophy, and that essentially is like freedom and the ability to act requires constraint. The individual must be constrained and molded, even brought close to destruction, right? Sometimes by restrictive and coherent disciplinary structure before he or she can act freely and competently. And I think that's also like an interesting point, because I feel like you have to have some structure. You have to learn. You have to understand, right? You have to, work a 9-to-5 job so you understand what that life is like before you can then start criticizing and improving and changing and thinking differently, right? Like, you have to go to school, become educated before you can just start criticizing the world and saying everything's messed up, right? I think that's an important part of just things to understand. And then getting into Socrates, which I thought was like really kind of interesting. So if you don't know like the story of Socrates, and I don't know the full details either, in detail, but essentially Socrates is a philosopher, right, of his time in ancient Greece, and about, I think, somewhere around in his like early 70s or something, he gets put on trial and essentially gets convicted of murder. And he actually considers his death like sentence to be a blessing rather than a curse. He saw that life, that his life was so rich and full that he could let go gracefully. He could escape a slow denigration of old age. Socrates rejected expediency and the necessity for manipulation that accompanied it. He decided under duress to to maintain his pursuit of the meaningful and the true. 2,500 years later, we are still talking about his decision and take comfort in it. And I thought that's like really, really pretty interesting because, you know, even under duress, even under this circumstances, he rejected, expediency. He rejected like lying or saying like, oh, I'm not guilty or whatever. He just accepted it, and said, okay, if you think I'm guilty of, whatever these philosophies and I'm teaching the world and the younger generation, so be it. Then I'm guilty of it. Let me kill me. And it doesn't have to be as dramatic as that, right? But there's a certain level of like, we value life, right? I think a lot of humans just innately value life, and he's willing to just let it go, right? And now his name lives on forever, not just because of that, but because of his philosophies and everything. But he was able to let go, and I think that's just like super super like fascinating, like, and it's the same thing even too with like Jesus Christ. I mean, he was able to go through suffering, and he could have avoided his crucifixion. He knew what was going to happen to him, but he continued anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a level of sometimes at some point, and I think these stories stick with us because they're so evident of the fact that like we need to be mindful that like, hey, we need to sometimes relinquish what's important to us. We need to be willing to sacrifice and suffer a little bit in order to do what's meaningful and what's better for humanity and for ourselves and our family and humanity and the world. And I think that's what those examples do. So I know I'm running through some of my notes here, so I was jumping around a little bit, but I think those are just great examples.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I don't have really too much to add to that. I think you pretty much nailed it on the head. I don't know. It's a good chapter just to. That's a cool look. I'm kind of stumbling here, but like, it's a good chapter, and the book in general is good because a lot of the chapters will apply to people who people in all different places of life. This is something you can be mindful of as you progress and you encounter new situations and go through life. This can apply to people who have been struggling with this, where their life isn't in balance and they tend to overindulge and they don't delay gratification for things. So it's really applicable to such a broad range of, I don't want to say people, but just places in life. And life is not like linear, so there's ups and downs, and it's just a good tool, and it's a good place to have your head at as you encounter things and to think about what is best for you today. Might not be what's best for you tomorrow, or what seems most enticing today might not lead to the best version of yourself tomorrow. So it's important.
Yeah.
It's important to pick your head up, get away from, I don't know, just like pick your head up, get away from the moment, and look at things in a bit of a broader perspective. I think that's a great tip, just to live well and to set yourself up for success. I'm guilty of it. It's not easy to do, but
No.
It's a good thing to try. It's a good thing to be working towards. So
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to end that chapter. So I think we can go into Rule 8 if you want.
so much to talk about in Rule 8.
Yeah. Now these next two are really quite great. So Rule 8, tell the truth or at least don't lie. In his clinical practice, Peterson saw that people chose to lie when they're fixated on an ill-formed desire, either a goal or an ideology, and will do or say anything to get it. The problem with living this way is that it assumes you already know everything you need to know about the future. When a person lives with this kind of blindness for long enough, sometimes they have to sacrifice their entire value system in order to live more authentically. When a person pridefully refuses to do this, they often conclude that the world itself is unfair and end up brutalizing others as a result. Taken to an extreme, lies produce totalitarianism. So it is crucial to be willing to learn from what you don't know, face reality truthfully, and pursue the good, even when that entails uncertainty or conflict. And I think this is like one of the most important things for people to do. And it's not an easy one, right? Because sometimes you feel like, and this one's kind of like hit home to me, even because all of us lie, right?
Everybody
Um,
does, yeah, some point or another.
Everybody has, everybody will. I probably will in the future, no doubt. Um, and if you don't admit that, like, that's probably the first thing that's wrong with you. So, just being an open book about stuff is like, really important. And I think what's like so important about it, like, because this chapter I've just really like thought a lot. It's like, well, why not just have like a little white lie, right? Like, let's say at work, I just don't want to come in one day and I want to go um, do something with my family, right, on a Friday, and so I just call in sick last minute because I don't want to tell them the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And you think, oh, well, what's that really hurting? I was sick on a Friday, whatever. What's the big deal? But I think the problem is like, if everybody does that, maybe then it breeds a culture where people don't feel honest to talk about the importance of spending time with their family or taking a day of rest, right? So it's like, how many people, work until they're like half demented, or like their job drives them crazy where it's affecting their health, or they don't want to admit that like spending family time is important, and maybe that is something that corporations and companies and whatever should start thinking about. That's important for people to be able to be a better productive worker, is to have time with their families. So sometimes you think like, oh, just this little white lie, I'll just tell them I'm sick, when really in reality I'm going out and like spending a day with my family. And I'm thinking about this because at my old firm, I kind of did that, right? I said I was sick because kind of last minute I wanted to go to um like this essentially a county fair in upstate New York with my mom and with Alini. And I just thought like, hey, that's the right way to put it. But maybe that wasn't the right way. Maybe that wasn't right for the company. Maybe that wasn't right for our culture or society. And, I should have been truthful. And, sometimes you think those little lies don't really matter, but they do, because it can form policy. It can awaken people's minds to what's important, and what needs to be changed, right? So I know that was a little bit of a tangent from this, a little bit, but I just thought that was like a really personal, like for me, example of how like it started going through my mind and what I was thinking, and the importance of just like not lying, even if it's small little lies,
Mm-hmm.
white lies, so to speak.
Well, I think that's a great example because everybody's done that with their job at some point. We've all played hooky. If you haven't done it with your job, you've certainly done it in school at some point. Like everybody
Yeah.
has done that. But to be fair too, I don't always blame people for doing that at their jobs. And I know it's a little counter um, intuitive to, what the book is getting at. But work environments don't always have a good culture. And there's people that work for not good people, who don't treat people with respect, and they don't respect their time, and they don't respect their family. And they see them almost as like a machine, right? Like you might as well be a computer. And if you're not showing up every day and giving 100%, then you must be broken, and they're gonna, they gotta throw you out and replace you with a a new one. Um, but it's you know, that's a very relatable thing. One of the
Yeah.
ideas that I thought about too in this is that I know a lot of people who lie to create illusions to appear like they're, I don't know, I don't want to say more respectable to society, but a lot of people equate, I mean, a lot of people equate success with money. Um, and for the most part, I guess, it kind of is. It's how it's universally looked at. But success could be happiness. Success could be, um, you know, are your kids doing well in school? Do your kids have friends? Are your kids happy? Like, there's a lot of ways to gauge success, but for the most part, people view it and equate it with money. And I know a lot of people who, I won't throw out any names because I love these people to death, and they're good people. But they certainly have like an element where they, I have one friend who I hesitate to pick up the phone to call him because I know the minute I talk to him, he's going to bring up like how much money he makes and like, oh, I'm doing this and I bought this watch and and it's just not a good place to, first of all, you're not fooling anybody because there's others, there's so many ways. Like when somebody makes a lot of money, you can tell. And generally, people that make a lot of money don't say anything about how much they. It's been my experience, anyways. Like the wealthiest people in the world. Like when you see, dude, you go to South Beach. It's hilarious in Miami. If anybody listening to this goes to South Beach, first of all, don't. But if you do, it's not a fun. But if you do go to South Beach, you're gonna see like.
Okay, I live in South Beach.
It's like, sorry, man. But you're gonna see people like driving, across there's like that main strip that's, super famous. It's like what everybody thinks about when they think of South Beach, and you'll see them driving around in like a Lamborghini with like the top down, music blaring. I saw one guy the last time I was there driving around in one of the SLS Mercedes. It's like $200,000, and it's got the gull wing doors, and he had the door up. Like, how much douchier could you get? Driving around with music blaring, you have the door up, like the two gull wings up so everybody could see you. And then as he drives by, I see on the back of the back of the vehicle, there's a tiny little sticker that says luxury rentals. And I'm like, really? Like, really? I mean, come on. But that's what I'm saying. So there's a lot of people like that. And it's just not a good place to be in. If you feel I'm not, I don't know.
I get what you're saying. I get what you're trying to get at.
Yeah. So
living a facade,
Exactly. And the thing is, like, it becomes a rat race because, like, you put that image up, you can't feel good when you go home. Like like,
yeah.
I don't know. Like, it's got to make you feel a little depressed.
You know the truth.
Exactly.
Yeah, you know the truth at the end of the day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's the pressure to keep up with it. It's like, do you see that person again? If you do, like, are you going to go buy another watch before? Are you putting that on credit to try to, like, pay it off? Like, so it's just not, like, just be who you are, be yourself. And that's one of the points that Jordan Peterson makes in this chapter that's really good, is like, if you're lying to other people, you're not able to be honest with yourself. And Andrew, you've done like a great job in this book so far talking about and like tying in negative feedback loops and stuff like that. But that could be a negative feedback loop on its own, where like you want to be something that you're not. You make decisions in your life to make yourself or portray yourself like you're somebody you're not. And then now you have the pressure to keep up with that if you want to stay in the same social circle. And then you have, that's just detrimental to your life. So that was one of the biggest.
As you're talking,
go ahead.
Yeah, the main point you got out of this chapter.
It was just the first thing I thought about when I started reading this chapter. That was the first thing that popped into my head.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's interesting, and I like the whole time you're talking about all that, I'm just kind of like smiling to myself, and I was looking behind me if I had the book, but that I'm also reading right now as well. And it's called The Psychology of Money. And hold on just 1 second, sorry. So The Psychology of Money is, I forget who wrote the book. I should look it up real quick.
It's a girl, right? Morgan.
Is it? I'm not sure if it's a guy or a girl, to be honest.
Sorry for anybody who's
Well,
a guy that has a name
it
Morgan.
could be both, right? It could be a guy or a girl with the name Morgan, I would think.
Morgan is one of those, but
we might get into trouble with just saying that, Jeff.
That's true. I gotta bleep that out. Don't come after me.
It's fine, but
don't come after me.
So Morgan Housel, Housel, and he or she wrote this book recently, and it's I think it's a he. I want to say it's a he, but
I'm looking it up. I need to know.
His Morgan Housel.
Fuck, it's a guy. Damn it.
Okay,
sorry, dude.
So it is a guy. So he writes this book, and it's fascinating, honestly, and that's why I'm hoping also we'll cover that after Extreme Ownership. But in the book, he talks about like two things. You said like originally about like wealthy people usually don't display their wealth that way, and one of the difference between, like, he defines somebody who's rich versus somebody who's wealthy. A rich person tends to be somebody who makes a lot of money every year, right? So they're rich, right? They have a high income. But a wealthy person is somebody who has a large store of like value, essentially, that's not necessarily displayed. It's being invested in the market. It's in properties. It's in other things. So you see somebody who comes across as wealthy, maybe they're driving a Toyota Camry, not that that's a bad car or whatever, but hey, it's kind of it's not eye turning, right? You don't assume somebody walking out of a Toyota Camry is like beyond wealthy, but then you come to realize that that person's worth, $20 million, and they own like 5 rental properties, and they have a huge stock portfolio. That person's wealthy. Whereas then you come across somebody who, and this is what he said, is that a lot of people who tend to display their wealth are not necessarily display their riches, aren't necessarily wealthy. And that's like a really important distinction to make. So I know that was a little bit of a tangent, but it kind of was going into what you were saying, and that like, but it gets into the overall thing about this chapter is like you were kind of alluding to. It's like, don't lie to yourself. Don't try to portray that you're rich to everybody, right? Like, develop wealth. Think about the long term. Don't do what's expedient, like from the prior chapter. Don't try to portray a lie that's not real. Because you're manipulating the world around you. And Peterson gets into this, like, he gets into 2 examples where he like speaks truthfully, which we can get into. But essentially his whole gist is that you can use the world to manipulate. You could, how did he say this again? I'm sorry. You can use the world to manipulate the world into delivering what you want, right? So you can manipulate your worlds around you to deliver what you want. But this leads to people avoiding responsibility, to justifying their criticism, to minimize the immediate conflict, right? And so you can manipulate the world to make excuses for yourself, to lie to yourself, to say, oh, well, I'm not wealthy because of, greedy capitalism and greedy whatever, politicians are spending all our money. But you're maybe just lying to yourself, and when you're doing that, you're becoming, too prideful, and you're becoming somebody who is not going to achieve great things because you're lying to yourself. You're manipulating the world to justify where you are, as opposed to taking a true assessment of where you are and figuring out ways to get to where you want to be, right? And the most important thing you can do is not lie to yourself. And I think that sometimes displaying riches is a lie to yourself. And I think there's going to be people that'll say, oh, well, fake it till you make it type of thing. But There might be some truth to that, right? To being confident, to displaying wealth, to appear wealthy, to get to where you want. But I think that's few and far between, if that makes sense. I think that can happen, and people can force themselves by trying to live a certain way. Um, you can maybe manifest that. I do think there is an element of it. Um, but I think that's also very like few and far between. Like it's important to be confident, right? Put yourself forward, show what you want, but don't lie to yourself to try to portray that you're more wealthy than you are, or more rich than you are, just to fit in, because you're not being true to yourself, and that mentality is very dangerous. So yeah, maybe lying to yourself by driving a fancy Porsche and trying to show off to others, maybe it will get you into that circle of other wealthy people, and you will build wealth, right, or riches. But maybe that constant lying, you're not a true person. You're not a true husband. You're not a true father. You're not a true friend. You can't be trusted, because you're constantly lying to yourself about who you are and what you come from and where you are. Does that make sense? um
Absolutely.
so I think even though sometimes lying might be able to get you what you want in the short term, I don't think it's a good long-term holistic way of approaching life. And I think that's what like Peterson's trying to get at with
hmm
this too.
Two notes on that too, and this is a little bit of a tangent away from. It's still relevant, but it's not exactly
Mhm.
like covering the book. But two things to that. You have to ask yourself if you're the type of person who is going to put up a facade like that. A, what type of people are you attracting in your life? Right? Like
Yep.
if your friends are just hanging or your so-called friends are just hanging around um because you drive a fancy car, or you're 20 something years old and you have a Rolex that you've financed and you're paying however much money a month for, um what kind of like are those good friends? Are those people that support you? What are they going to do when they find out like the truth? Are they just there because you have money? Like, my point is, you want to surround yourself, and this is another chapter in Jordan Peterson's book, one of the earlier chapters that we talked about. Like, it's important to surround yourself with people who want the best for you. People who want the best for you are going to like you for who you are, and they're going to want to see you succeed. They're not going to like you for what you have or
Absolutely.
what you perceive to have. The other thing is, if you're young and you're making those types of rash decisions, I know a few people who got out of school and like first thing they did was um, you know get into a fancy apartment and buy like fancy BMWs and things like that. Um, what are what about the people who have good jobs and are investing that money and they're saving that money and they're growing that money? It's like you may appear like you're winning now, but those like um I don't know. The people who aren't doing that, the people who are being financially responsible, are going to be leagues ahead of you in the long run. If
Yep.
you're pissing away $1,100 a month to have a BMW, and then you're paying for an apartment on top of that, and you're trying to buy fancy clothes so that when you go out with your friends, you look all nice, and so on and so forth. Like, there's no way that you have, I mean, unless you're making crazy amounts of money, that's not really the people we're talking about here, though.
Yeah.
There's no way that you're going to be saving or investing and planning for your future. And all the people who are doing that, who are forgoing those types of luxury items and are putting it into the market and making smart financial decisions with it, you're not even going to be able to compete with them in 30 years. So
Yep.
that I think that lends
Yeah,
itself to the
absolutely.
last chapter where you're looking ahead. But yeah.
No, I think that's an awesome like statement. And I think that's very, very true for a lot of people. And again, it's the difference between rich and wealthy, right? The wealthy person's probably the one that's socking the money away and not getting the BMW or taking the more, modest apartment or whatever, and they're not spending the money and they're saving it and they're manifesting a future where they can, put the money towards more meaningful, holistic things, right? Maybe vacations with their loved ones, or a down payment on a house. Um, so yeah, it's important. Don't lie to yourself. Um, it's not a good way to live your life. And I think Peterson's 100% about this, and I'm trying to make a more conscious effort too, not to lie to people. So like, I think sometimes I have to be quiet, and I think that'll get into the next chapter as well. But like, in other words, don't necessarily put advice out there to somebody who doesn't want to receive it. But if somebody asks you for something, be truthful about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if somebody asks you a question, answer it truthfully. Don't beat around the bush. And I know you said before, like, oh, I think there are times where, like, yeah, you're a little nervous about your boss or whatever, but and I get that, like, people have real world scenarios where they're afraid for their job, but then maybe that's not the right job for you, and maybe you need something different, and maybe your boss does need to be told off. And maybe you'll be respected because you do stand up for what's important to you and you set boundaries. So I think that's important. Like, just be straight with people. I think you'll be more respected by it. I think people in positions of power do respect other people who stand for what they believe in and are willing to take that risk of, I don't know, being fired, right? I think a good leader would appreciate that. Or, even if they're not a good leader, if they've gotten to a position of power, they could understand and at least respect that, that you're being truthful and that you're not afraid. But yeah, I mean, I think this is a really good chapter. I mean, there's a lot of like little details. I mean, I could throw a couple little things out there. So just to give you a little more context of some specifics about the book. So like, Peterson early on, he's at like a mental hospital up in Montreal, I guess, during his like clinical experience, becoming a clinical psychologist. And a patient asked to like follow them around, and he essentially tells them, he remembers, like, hey, I don't want to lie to this guy. So he just tells them honestly, like, hey, look, we're students. Like, we have like different rotations we got to go to, and you can't accompany us. And the person took that and accepted it, and kept going. And then he talks about another patient when he had his clinical practice, or maybe it was when he was studying. It was a dangerous and paranoid patient, and this patient would just look out, and he could like stalk you. He could be dangerous, right? And he took any type of like shot at his pride very seriously. So he just realized, like, hey, with somebody like this, I have to be completely truthful with him, because if I'm not, that's not going to cool him down. Whereas, so then he ended up building a relationship of trust, because he was forthcoming about his thoughts, and he was very specific and true. And then Peterson goes on and talks about this biker landlord that he has, and this biker landlord, I guess, is a drunk, and he's a little bit of a, I don't know, a little bit of a rough and tough guy. He was like the head of a biker gang, so not really an ideal person. And he would try to like sell Peterson things so that he could like get money, essentially. And eventually Peterson couldn't take it anymore. He couldn't take the lying. He couldn't say that he's going to constantly buy his stuff. Like, he would try to sell paintings and other stuff to him, and Peterson felt obliged. So one night he knocked on his door like late at night, and Peterson just literally says, okay, this is enough. I can't lie to this guy anymore. I got to be just straight up with him and just say that, like, his wife is afraid when you knock drunk late at night on our door. It makes her feel uncomfortable, and I can't buy anything from you anymore. And the biker kind of looked at him like super serious, like, because he's again somebody who's strong, who's like probably beaten people up. Who knows if he's murdered people? And he looks for any sort of like sarcasm or smile in Peterson's voice, and he realizes that Peterson's just being truthful, and he just accepts that, and he says, and he just kind of turns around and walks away. And he doesn't beat up Peterson. He kind of respects him for being truthful, and realizes that his actions aren't really appropriate. So I thought that was just like a really super interesting example. It was like, even in the face of somebody who can do harm to you, just being absolutely truthful, people respect that because I think they see the bullshit when you're not being truthful.
Mm-hmm.
Even somebody as like scary as like a biker gang, guy. So yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add on that, but I just wanted to give out that example, or those couple examples.
Yeah, I remember that part of the book. That's a great example. I don't have anything to add directly right now, but there are a few instances in the next chapter, in chapter 9, that I think tie
You want to
back
bring
to
up?
this. Yeah, they
Okay.
tie back to this. Which, I mean, that's the cool thing about this book, is there's a lot of these like principles are interconnected, and they do feed into one another. But
Absolutely.
yeah, so I'll bring some
I
stuff up then.
will. Okay, so then I think what I'll do is I will, because we're approaching an hour and we want to stay somewhere around. We don't want to go too far over an hour. Well, we'll see how
Is it
things go,
really? Oh
right?
my god,
But
it's been 51
yeah, we're
minutes.
already 51 minutes in.
It
So
flies.
page
These podcasts
two30.
they
I
fly.
know they do. You know what it is too? There's a lot of just like great content to cover, and I think just there's so many good examples, and I don't know. I write down so many notes. I think I could talk for like several hours on these chapters. So yeah, well, I mean, we'll see how received they are. But yeah, and then kind of go from there whether we need to extend them or not. But we thought, staying around the hour mark, not not too much longer, would be a good good length.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought I said 2:30. I highlighted this, so I think this is what I kind of wanted to end on. For this chapter, for telling the truth. To tell the truth is to bring the most habitable reality into being. Truth builds edifices that can stand 1,000 years. Truth feeds and clothes the poor, and makes nations wealthy and safe. Truth reduces the terrible complexity of a man to the simplicity of his word, so that he can become a partner rather than an enemy. Truth makes the past truly pass. I'm sorry. Truth makes the past truly past and makes the best use of the future's possibilities. Truth is the ultimate, inexhaustible natural resource. It's the light in the darkness. See the truth, tell the truth. So we can go on to the next chapter. Don't lie, people.
Tell your friends.
Rule 9. Rule 9. Assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. Peterson learned that it is often most effective to just listen to his patients talk. It gives them a chance to organize their thoughts, which is often easier with a dialogue partner. A conversation partner can also help you distill your memories into a moral of the story, which is the whole point of a memory. Peterson says such mutual exploration is the highest form of conversation, which takes place on the border between order and chaos, and demands that you assume your interlocutors have, I don't even know that word, have something to teach you. So yeah, I don't know. What do you? I know you had a lot to talk about with this chapter, and I mean we can hit it in different ways, but
Yeah.
what did this chapter mean to you, and what were kind of the big things you got out of it?
So I guess I'll start this off with a quote, because I think this type of book, like I said, it's applicable to so many different things in life. So what this book means to me today, in like where I'm at in my life, it may mean something completely different to me in a couple years from now, right? And that's the beauty of these principles, is that they carry you through time and through your life. But what I was thinking about when I'm reading this chapter is, right now we live in a world that's pretty politically divided. And I don't want to get into politics or anything right now, but I do want to like touch on principles that go on when people with different political views discuss things. So with that being said, I'll kick it off with a quote. from the book, and it says, "True thinking is complex and demanding. It requires you to be an articulate speaker and a careful, judicious listener at the same time. It involves conflict, so you have to tolerate conflict. The conflict involves negotiation and compromise, so you have to learn to give and take and to modify your premises and adjust your thoughts, even your perceptions of the world." So much, and I have, just to share a little bit about like me, is one thing that I enjoy doing is I have friends who have all sorts of different political beliefs. I have friends that are very conservative, friends that are very liberal. And when you talk to people, even if you don't agree with what they say, I think it's important to just have enough respect for them as human beings to listen to what they have to say. It doesn't mean that when they're done and the conversation's over that you have to agree with them and change your opinion, but you also don't have to be outraged by it either. And with that, just generally what I see with most people is that people close the door on alternative thought and or alternative knowledge. So in other words, if they have a political view that's different from yours, and you share that, they want to almost ostracize you or shut you out. They don't want to associate themselves with you anymore. That's a dangerous place to be, and I think conversation is important. Conflict to a degree. Now, I'm not saying go and beat each other up, but debating, that like a debate type of conflict is important. It's important to challenge ideas. It's important to challenge theories. And I think if you're open-minded when you discuss things with people who may have a different political belief than you, or I'm using that as an example. It could be anything. You may learn some things in the process, and if you don't learn some things, if nothing else, it just solidifies the way you already felt. By listening to somebody else talk through their thoughts. So I thought about that.
Yeah,
That was a
you
big...
develop more arguments.
Exactly.
You develop like better points to your argument or your opinion.
Sorry,
and I think that's cut you off there.
No, that's okay. It's interesting because, do you know who Graham Hancock is? Have you heard about him? He's been on Joe Rogan and everything. He's got that Ancient Apocalypse show on Netflix. I watched the whole thing.
I watched that one.
Yeah. He's got some crazy compelling evidence that, there was a advanced civilization that existed in history. And then there was probably some sort of cataclysmic event, whether it was an asteroid or, most likely an asteroid. I think that's what most evidence points to. That wiped that civilization out and wiped that technology out. And that, just because technology, people think the word technology, they automatically associate it with like computers and high rises and stuff like that, but they could have had complex math equations that we didn't even know about to be able to build some of the structures they had and learn how to manipulate weight and transfer weight and stuff like that for building structures like the pyramids and things. He has a lot of compelling evidence for his theories, and you see him being ostracized and shut down by the traditional, I guess, geologists and archaeologists and these universities and people who have published papers. I think a lot of it is ego driven. Like, they've published papers and they've been lecturing for years and years, and it's disheartening to them to see that maybe that all of everything they've been teaching for the last couple of years suddenly is untrue or is challenged by another theory that has better evidence.
It's your pride. That's what, like, Peterson talked in the last chapter about your pride being like hindering you from being able to grow. Addressing what you thought was right.
Absolutely, yeah. But it's things like that, like, and that's what we see in society, and we see that with politics too. The last thing I'll say on the politics note, which is what I wanted to tie back, is if you're in a debate with or not even a debate, a conversation, like I said, I'll listen to anybody talk. I don't care like what their political beliefs are. I'll listen to them. If I don't feel like they're an accepting person, if I get the vibe from them that if I say something they don't like, doesn't mean I'm afraid to speak my views, but like, is it worth it for me to get into like an argument with somebody, like I'll ask myself that.
Yeah.
I'm like, honestly, what's the point? So what I find myself doing goes back to the last chapter. Tell the truth, or at the very least, don't lie. It doesn't mean I have to be forthcoming about what I, you know, what I feel, but I can say something as blatantly as, or as blankly as, well, you make some interesting points. I've never thought about it that way. I could very well be telling the truth when I say that. It doesn't mean I agree with them either, but it's just a way to be kind of passive through a situation where you're not lying, you're telling the truth, you're also listening to somebody else's opinion. But anyways, I've talked a lot. I want to hear what you had taken away from this one.
I don't know. As you keep talking, I think there's an element of doing this through the computer where it's like I don't want to mess up your train of thought, but then I also want to like add to it like in the moment.
Yeah.
But also like I want you to say everything that you got to say. So I think you hit like so many great points.
No, I do. One day I want to do like, I don't know if like I'll, come up to, where you're at, or you come down here or whatever, but and maybe if this podcast really took off, we could move to the same place. But I think it'd be fun to do these in person, because I think it's there is, and for people listening, if you ever hear us like when we talk over each other, it's not because we're talking over each other, but there is a bit of a delay between, like when you receive my thought. And so sometimes like with gaps in words and stuff like that, it can be hard to know when to like jump in. But it'd be fun to do these in person one day.
Absolutely. Yeah, it would be awesome. But still, I try not to take for granted what we have in today's world. I mean, it's still freaking amazing that I can like see your face from 2,000 miles away and we can have a conversation and have this podcast. So I just think it's just a testament to how like amazing the world has become in so many ways. So look at the good, not always the bad in our modern world, right? You hit like so many good things. I was like trying to jot down notes as you were talking. And I think conflict to a degree, like you kind of brought that up a little bit, is important, right? You said conflict can be good, right? And I totally agree with that. And Peterson does say, I've even listened to him on like Instagram and other like social media, where he says like what you want in a partner is like you want like periods of peace, but followed by like a good conflict, like a good argument, right? Because if you don't have a good argument, if you're not with somebody who has some opinions and or is not willing to talk it through and have an argument with you, this gets into some future chapters, but just push things under the rug, right? That is not healthy. You are not going to grow, because you need to have a little bit of tension every once in a while. You need to be combated with what you're, because otherwise you think you know everything today, right? A lot of people, right? I'm just saying that like broadly. But if you don't come into some kind of conflict, you're not going to grow. If you never feel that uneasy feeling, or you're never like, you don't approach me, Jeff, and say, you know what, Andrew, like the comment you made the other day, I'm just using that as an example, I really didn't appreciate that. Like, I found it offensive. Like, can you not? And I found it offensive because of this, this, and this. And maybe don't say that next time. I'd appreciate it. And, maybe like, wow, okay, that makes me feel uncomfortable. You're not lying, right? You're telling me the truth about something. And then maybe I can reflect and say, you know what? Maybe that isn't the best course of action. Maybe that isn't the right thing to say. Maybe I'm going to change and grow, right? But it takes an element of conflict. It takes an element of somebody being strong and speaking up. And then it also takes a little bit of humility to say, you know what? I don't know everything. And you know what? Maybe you are right. And I noticed that even in my relationship, with Lainey, is like, she's a strong girl, right? Like in her mindset and her opinions and what she believes is right and wrong. And I've grown tremendously being her partner. I really have. Like I'm able to like criticize myself a little bit more. I'm able to think differently. And then there's times where, she even tells me, she's like, I don't want you to just back down if I say something, like, let's go at it. And there's times where like, no, like, I'm not going to freaking back down, and we go at it. Like, and I like, But I feel like it builds, and this gets into a later chapter, so I don't want to get into it too much, but it builds a stronger relationship because you're not brushing things under the rug and you're dealing with it right then and there. Um, and I'm listening to what she has to say, or I'm listening to what you have to say, or I'm listening to whoever. Like, everybody's lived a different sort of like life, and they, no matter, even if you think they're a dumb person, right? And this is what kills me about some people, especially some of these like intellectuals who think they know everything, right? Because they have an advanced degree. Is like, you don't know everything. You've lived one life. You haven't had all the experiences that some other people have had. You know, you don't know what it's like to be, I don't know, a logger in Alaska, right? What that's like. You know, what that day to day, or oil, drilling for oil up in Canada, and what that life is like, and how hard that is, and the harshness of the winters, and the things you have to prepare for. And if you're not smart about, like, making sure you're ready for the winter, like, you could be out of energy and you could die. You know what I mean? Like, that's a skill that, like, can be appreciated and learned from. And maybe maybe their hands are full of grease and you think they're stupid, right? But maybe they're really not. Maybe they know a lot of things about life that you don't. And you talked about, like, Graham Hancock and his his whatever episodes on his story, or what is I don't even know what it's called, documentary, I guess, kind of
yeah, ancient
Ancient
apocalypse.
Apocalypse.
Yeah.
And like you said, there could be super advanced societies, and maybe back then, maybe they knew stuff we didn't know. They had technologies we don't even have today, and maybe the fact that, like, they didn't have computers like we have today, maybe they were actually more advanced than us. Maybe they realized consciously, like, we don't want to go down that path because we know what might happen, right? Like, it's not to say that we are the most advanced today. Like, maybe they were more advanced than us and we just don't appreciate that, or we don't know that. Or maybe they were more in touch with what was important and they lived super happy lives. Like, they were, like, very, very happy people. Whereas, like, you ask people today how happy they are, and, like, happiness is, like, on a downward trajectory the last, like, 100 years, or last 80 years. So I think it's important not to assume that people are stupid or people don't have something that they can bring to the table and teach you. And it's something too that, like, I also, like, am getting better at, and I have struggled with this in the past. So, like, because there are times where it's like, I think I know best, right? And it's like, man, you don't. Like, I still have so much to learn from and so much to grow from, and have a sense of humility, like, have a little bit of, like, put your best foot forward and try shit, and, like, don't be afraid. But then at the same time too, be able to reflect and take some criticism and think about it and improve for the better. So it's that balance between chaos and order. It's the middle line, between the good and the bad, and sort of that middle path. And it's life is it's like an art, right? It's like an art to living a good life. And I think finding that middle path is where it's at. So I know I've gone on for a while as well.
No,
but
that's awesome.
I think this is a good chapter.
It's a great chapter, and it's super relevant, I think, to just where we are today as a global society. I mean, the nonsense of we even have it in kind of the whole idea of creating this podcast was like, we want to be uncensored. We want to talk about our thoughts, and there's this connotation that's in the world today of, like, if you don't agree with somebody, or somebody has a different opinion than you, it's like you want to disparage them, you want to silence them, and it's not healthy.
Yeah.
In fact, it's the opposite of healthy. The to be healthy is to listen to people with other opinions and to accept them. Like I said, when I first was talking about this chapter, you don't have to agree with them. No one's telling you at the end of the day that you have to agree with them, but you should respect other people's opinions. You should see where they're coming from. They've likely had an entirely different path than you have in life. And just because they have a select group of opinions that you don't agree with is like not a reason to not be friends with them. And I have friends that I've been, going on 5-6 years of being like hanging out with them every week, who have completely different political views than I do, completely different views on the world than I do. And I still laugh with them, still have a great time. I can't wait to see them. Have they changed my opinion over the 6 years that I've known them? Absolutely not. Have I changed theirs? Nope. But it's like we're still friends. And we need more of that. And honestly, I have one note I actually skipped over on here. Having the full attention of another human being can cause a speaker to feel valued, comforted, and supported. I think that's literally the essence of what makes the friendships that I have with people who don't have the same views as me. I feel like that's what makes it work. Is like even though there's a difference of opinion, just sitting down and listening to them, and them to me, like having this respect for one another and valuing and you know I don't want to say supporting opinion, because obviously like they're different, but valuing our the opinion and appreciating where we're coming from. There's not a lot
Yeah, and it's
of people like that, but we need more of
yeah.
them.
No, yeah, exactly. No, I totally agree. And I think like you just said, what was the quote that you just said?
um having the full attention of another human being can cause the speaker to feel valued, comforted, and supported.
Yeah, and if not a speaker, let's say a child who's trying to get their emotions out, right? Or just wants to be listened. Like I find like even with kids, it's like I think sometimes parents in today's world, they want to like give them like all the experiences and they want to like do this and that, but it's like just listen to your kid, you know, just spend some quality time with them, like at night. Like that's what I firmly believe. Like, yeah, you could be busy doing a million things, but if you just take 20 minutes at night and sit down with your kid and just talk to them face to face, when you're putting them to bed or whatever in the morning, whatever it is, just carve out some time to like really truly talk to somebody, and you'll make them and listen to them. You'll make their world. Um, and it's amazing because I think so many people are lonely and they don't have somebody to talk to. And that's one thing like I really like value our relationship is like, that we can like talk to each other and be honest. And like to me that's like so important. Like there's no amount of money that can buy that.
Mm-hmm.
Is to have somebody that'll actually listen to me. You listen to me better than I listen to you, although I'm trying to get better at it. But like just be there and talk, and because even Peterson says like people need to talk, because that's how people think, right? And people need to think, otherwise he kind of says that people walk blindly into pits, or fall into holes. When people think, they stimulate the world, and plan how to act in it, and if they do a good job stimulating, then they can figure out what the stupid things they shouldn't do. And it's like having these conversations. It's like if you're a genuine person, you're willing to listen to me and I'm willing to listen to you, we can help each other, right? And we can make each other like think in different ways and be stronger and figure out what it is that we need to be, successful, good people. And it's having a conversation, and too many people don't have conversations. It kills me is like in today's world, even with my parents, sometimes like I'll go over to their house and like, we don't have dinners all the time, but let's say we sit down for dinner and like the TV's on in the background, like behind me, and like I'm talking to my mom and my dad, more so my dad this happens with, but they're like distracted, they're like looking at the TV for a second. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm here, let's talk. Don't be looking at the freaking TV. And like that, it's so bad. People need to talk. They need to corroborate. They need to explain what they've been through, and they need to bounce ideas off of people, and they have to figure out what's important to them. And talking helps that, and it helps set your trajectory. So people who want to succeed, who want to do well, who want to grow, talk and find genuine people to talk to. You don't want to talk necessarily always to like people who aren't going to listen, but somebody who's going to really listen, because that person who's going to really listen is going to give you honest advice from what they think, or they're going to at least be able to bounce ideas off of you and get you to stimulate your thoughts. And again, that's a big difference between, because there's a lot of toxic people out there, but toxic people don't listen to you. And I think that's important to remember.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to end it. I don't have really anything else to add. Do you have any last points that you wanted to make?
Well, maybe I'll end with a little bit of Socrates again.
Okay.
So, and also a little tidbit about advice. And I've been trying to do this a little bit more, like jotting down some notes of what you said and then trying to like repeat it in maybe a different word, a different version. So that's one like advice that Peterson gives, is like how to listen. Summarize what the other person has said and ask them if I understood or you understood them. So that's really important. Like try that when talking to people. And then kind of in the end, I wrote this last note. The Delphic oracle in ancient Greece spoke highly of Socrates, who always sought the truth. She described him as the wisest living man because he knew that what he knew was nothing. Assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. So even the wisest of men knew that he didn't know everything, and then he knew nothing. Right? What he knew was so minuscule. And I think that's like fascinating. So be humble, listen to others, talk to others, keep learning, and read this book. It's a great book.
Awesome. I think that was a great way to end it.
Yep, absolutely. So, see you guys.